Hello and welcome to another Cork and Taylor Wine Podcast. I am here in a pretty picturesque place with the man and the family behind the greatest avocados. Are you part of the Haas empire, avocado empire?
Lots of people mistake me for that, but no, spelled differently. That's Hass.
Well, I don't care. I mean, let's
Can
be
I
honest.
claim it?
You can claim whatever you want. The only reason I'm interviewing you, I don't care about the wine and the story and really you. I just want some free avocados. My boys go through so many avocados, it's not even funny.
Yeah, well, that can happen.
Okay, so we got Jason Haas, who was the 2015 Paso Robles Wine County Wine Industry Person of the Year, and then 2 years later got the same award in San Luis Obispo. I mean, you're big time.
Thanks.
You're big time. So we're here. Thanks for joining the Cork and Taylor Wine Podcast. I really appreciate it. I mean, it's gorgeous. What else can you say? This is a great place to work.
Yeah, Paso Robles in February can be awfully nice.
Yes.
That's the thing. People think of California mostly in the summer. I mean, that's the blue sky and the gold hillsides and the beach, but I love it in the winter. I love that it rains occasionally. The hillsides all turn green. The days are still like today. It's supposed to get up to 70, frosted last night. Like, I love it here in the winter.
Yeah. I told you before we taped this that I almost brought you Thanksgiving dinner. I had a little bit of a roadblock. Ran into nine or 10 turkeys. Freaked the crap out of me.
It's pretty wild out here still. I mean, you see
those are wild
mountain
turkeys.
Lions, you
see mountain lions, really.
You see bobcats. You occasionally see bears. Lots of raptors. We had a bald eagle out here last fall.
Yeah. Raptors, like dinosaur raptors?
No, that'd be a little more dangerous, I think. No, like hawks and eagles.
Oh, okay.
And owls.
That kind of raptor. Okay. Shoot. It's kind of looking. That'd be cool.
Yeah, you didn't realize you ended up in Jurassic Park.
Oh, ooh, kind of crazy. So really cool and kind of a unique background, your family, and then obviously you partnered with a very well-known, regarded French family in this project. I guess I want to talk about that, but I'm curious. I thought you'd have more of a French name in your winery.
It's interesting. So Tablas Creek is a partnership. It's equally owned and run by my family and by a family of French winemakers. My dad was Robert Haas. He was an American wine importer for 6 decades. He founded a company called Vineyard Brands and represented a lot of great wines from around the world. One of which was Chateau de Beaucastel from...
Never heard of it.
Yeah, right.
One of my favorites. I got some of my cellar in the basement. Love that stuff.
That's the flagship estate of the Perrin family, and he became friendly with the brothers who ran that estate through the 70s and 80s.
And he imported their wines, correct?
Yeah, still does. The company still does.
Oh, wow.
And so they decided, based on trips to California, where they would come back talking about how much it reminded them of the south of France, that there was an opportunity for doing a Rhone-style project in California. And 4 years, we looked for 4 years, ended up picking this spot here in West Paso Robles. But the idea was always to make our identity be about our place, not call it like Beaucastel, California, or Beaucastel West, or something like that. That instead, to have it be named for the place in which we are. And Las Tablas Creek is a creek that runs through a corner of the vineyard. Mm-hmm. We felt like it was important that it be that our identity be centered on this place rather than either the names of the partners or Beaucastel, which is amazing, but 6,000 miles away.
Oh. Well, it's just funny because you look at. You're right. That's true because there's like Domaine Chandon,
right,
in Napa or Sonoma, wherever it's Corneris region. It takes something, and that's really interesting. That happens. So how did you guys decide what grapes to grow? Is it kind of you work together? How does that work with that kind of relationship? One being in one family in France and one family that has boots on the ground here.
Right. So, I mean, it's a little different in the times of COVID, but they're here a lot. So it's not as though they're just silent partners that are over in France that put up some money at the beginning. I mean, we see them 3 or 4 times a year. We're over there once or twice a year. It's still very much an active partnership. So the decisions are made together. But in terms of what grapes we were going to plant, we actually knew that before we had the place. We knew that we were looking at kind of a Chateauneuf-du-Pape Southern Rhone model, so we knew we wanted to base the reds on Mourvedre and Grenache and the white on Roussanne. And we found the place to suit that rather than trying to pick the grapes to suit the place that we already had. Because I didn't grow up in California. I grew up in Vermont. My dad was an importer based first in New York and then moved to Vermont. So neither we nor the Perrins had a footprint in California. We had an idea and then picked this spot in 1989 because in terms of soils and climate and rainfall, we thought it would be a really good match for those grapes.
So did you grow up here?
No, I grew up in Vermont.
Oh, yeah. So you didn't like, I guess I knew you grew up in Vermont. I was listening, believe it or not. But I thought you might have moved here when you were like 10 or 12 or.
I mean, they bought this property in 89 when I was already a sophomore in high school.
Okay.
So I didn't make my first trip out here until 95, and I didn't move out here until 02. So I mean, I was already almost 30 when I moved out here.
Wow.
Seems hard to believe that I moved out here almost 20 years ago.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? It's like when you have kids and you're married, it's like, wow, I've been married for 16 years. Wow. I feel bad for my wife. Did you ever think you would be running a winery growing up? I mean, you obviously had roots in the wine business.
Roots in the wine business. And the thing about growing up with a dad who's a wine importer is that if you don't make summer plans, you tend to get sent to a vineyard somewhere to work.
I'm going to remember that one.
In my experience,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe my experience isn't totally normal, but so I grew up around a lot of wine people. I grew up around wine families. I grew up spending those summers washing tanks and rolling up hoses and sulfuring barrels.
Isn't that normal?
It was for me. As I was growing up, though, it was the import side of the business that was kind of what I saw on a day-to-day basis, and I didn't see myself doing that. I didn't see myself kind of selling other people's wines. And again, Tablas Creek didn't start till I was 16, so it wasn't like that was a model that I had in my head. But I thought I'd end up in the wine business somewhere. I just didn't know what it would look like. But once this got going and once I got to see all of the different pieces that it encompassed, because you've got farming pieces, you've got kind of chemistry, winemaking pieces, you've got artistic blending pieces, you've got business pieces, marketing pieces,
sales, market.
I mean, there's all these different facets, and I find that really fascinating. I find the diversity of what I get to do in running a family winery business incredibly just engaging and varied and appealing.
So the 3 listeners that might be importers or wine distributors, he doesn't like what you guys do.
Far from the truth.
No, I'm just kidding with you.
My brother took over actually big chunks of what
really?
my dad was doing at his import business. He's the one who took over the trips to France and the buying of the wines and the managing of the French suppliers. So I saw that piece of what he was doing, but he was already doing it.
Right.
So this was a chance for me to spread my wings a little bit.
Nice. Did your dad ever talk about, before all this, really wanting to get into this side of it, not the import, more of the supplier side, the being a winery?
I think it's pretty common, really, in the world of people who sell wine, who, particularly if you're importing. I mean, you think of what like Kermit Lynch has done. I mean, there's a lot of people who see other people doing it and think, man, I'd like to have my fingerprints on something that's really mine. So I know that my dad had talked about partnerships potentially with some of his Burgundy suppliers before this came about. So I'm sure this was in his head for a long time before this actually took shape.
Did you have to have much convincing to do this?
No, I say without a huge amount of confidence. So my dad did a really good job of kind of getting me involved in this at the early stage without making me feel like I was pushed into it. So I always think of this kind of as an analogy, sort of held that door open and said, look what's on the other side of that door, but waited for me to feel ready to walk through it. And I also didn't want to go straight into a family business right out of school. I didn't feel like I would have brought enough. So, I mean, I got a master's degree in archaeology and I taught for a little while. And then I ended up getting recruited to join a tech company during the tech bubble in the late 90s. And helped build up a tech company for 4 years. And by the time Tablas Creek was ready, needed somebody really to run it, I was ready to step into that role. But I don't think that would have been the same thing if I had come out here right after college in 1995.
Mm-hmm. Nice. You know what's amazing is some of the cuttings, or the first vine cuttings you brought in from France, and it took 3 years?
Yeah.
Which was it, just sitting on, like, those cuttings just sitting on someone's desk, or?
No. So this is part of a USDA program for every plant. If you bring it into the country, has to go through some sort of a quarantine, because you don't want to bring in a pest or
unless you maybe tape it to your leg and bring it in illegally, which I've heard
that does happen.
A very well regarded winery or wine owner, winemaker, whatever he is, wine renegade in Napa did that years ago. I won't say his name.
Honestly, that's the way that most vines have come into, or at least in a certain era, came into the
You better
country.
count yours, because I got big legs.
You're welcome to them. But I mean, I understand the reasoning, and I believe in the reasoning behind it. I mean, you don't want to be responsible for bringing in a pest or a virus that devastates an industry.
I get it.
And so what happens is the grapevine program, there are 9 viruses that they're testing for. This happens at 3 different stations around the country. The one that we went through was in upstate New York. It's associated with Cornell. So they basically have Cornell scientists who are grafting your grapevines onto vines that are known to be susceptible to certain viruses, growing them for a couple of months and seeing if that grapevine gets sick. And if it shows signs of the sickness, they know it's because of the contact with your vine. If it doesn't, then they can cross that virus off the list, cut that off, they graft a new indicator vine on, and it just takes us 3 years worth of growing time to get through all the viruses.
So it wasn't sitting on someone's desk in Cornell.
No, it was in a greenhouse. It was in a greenhouse in Cornell. You could go and sing to the vines if you really wanted to.
I think I'll pass. So let's talk some more, obviously, but let's try the first wine.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I brought the Grenache Blanc.
Okay.
This is a variety that
perfect. Thank
we
you.
introduced into the U.S. in 1989. It had never been used here before, and it's turned into this really huge success story. It's a variety that's fairly widely planted in the Rhone. It's actually the most widely planted white variety in the southern Rhone, but it's hardly ever seen on its own in France. You do see a little bit of it on its own in Spain, but in California, it keeps the kind of full body and nice mouthfeel and a little bit of sweet spice that it has in France. But because of how cold our nights are, it gets brighter acid, and the kind of citrus character is emphasized. And it's turned out to be a really great blending component, but also something that's really delicious on its own. And it's kind of taken off in the last 30 years here in California.
Delicious. That's really delicious. Be taking some of those cuttings home.
It's a good one to take home, actually, because it's easy to grow. One of the reasons why it's as widely planted as it is
I live
vigorous.
I live in Ohio.
Yeah?
It'll work?
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, you might need to...
Just call me in 3 years is what you're saying.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I'm making promises here. But, I mean, you might need to protect it from, like build up some mulch around it in the winter to protect it from a really hard freeze.
Kids, boys, young boys.
Dogs.
Yeah, whatever.
But it's a pretty, on the scale of Rhone varieties, it's one of the easiest to grow. And one of the reasons why it's been as successful in California as it has is that people have planted it successfully in Sonoma and Napa and the Sierra Foothills, Santa Barbara County, Monterey, here. It's good in lots of places. And that's actually another piece of the story that I'm super proud of, though I didn't really have anything to do with it. But early on, after we'd gotten the vines out of quarantine, my dad and the Perrins had a discussion and made the decision not to try to keep these vines proprietary, but instead to make them available to anybody who wanted to buy and plant them. And we ended up in this second business of selling grapevine cuttings. And that's allowed
the nursery.
The grapevine nursery.
Yep.
And that's allowed, I think, this footprint of Rhone varieties in California to grow to the point that it's really helped all of us because it's established a category. And this has been one of the real success stories. It went from nothing when we started, and there's now like 700 acres of it in California.
Holy cow.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's kind of like one of those horses that wins the Triple Crown. They just breed them, you know. It costs more money. This is delicious.
Thanks.
Did you ever think of just coming up a name with that? Because I feel like a lot of your wines have names associated with them. They're not maybe Grenache, like just like Grenache Blanc, and then they're kind of. Did you ever think about doing that, or just Grenache Blanc, and that's what it is, and it's fantastic?
So there's sort of two things that we do. I mean, a big chunk of what we do, almost 85% of our production is blends, and that's the tradition that we inherit from the Southern Rhone, and because those are blends, you have to come up with a name for them. So the wine that we'll have next is our Esprit de Tables, which is our flagship red blend. But we realized fairly early on that we were working with varieties that people in California and in America didn't know. And so when possible, we've tried to pick a lot or two of each grape and bottle it on its own as that variety to help the variety get itself established. So, I mean, we'll do 10 or 15 different varietal wines this year named for the varietal, and in most cases it's like 50 cases or 200 cases. It's not large quantities, but we feel like that's an important kind of counterbalance to the blends that we're doing, because the blends are a reflection of our place and our style and our philosophy, our winemaking art. That sounds pretentious to say it, but it's like it's sort of our vision of how those grapes fit together. But we feel like putting the variety front and center in wines is valuable for a different reason and serves kind of a different purpose. So we always do. I mean, we've done a varietal Grenache Blanc every year but one since 2002, and a lot of that is because we feel like it's a grape which is worthy of people's attention and notice, and it's hard for people to wrap their heads around it if it's just a component in a blend.
Right. And you know what I'm really digging this past summer, even the last 2 years, is white blends from your region, from Paso. There's just something about them. They're delicious.
I think
it's not Sauvignon Blanc or Chardonnay, and I do enjoy Sauvignon Blanc, and I do enjoy some Chardonnays, but a white blend, they're hard to sell being a distributor, because what are they, right?
Right.
And white drinkers are very, at least in my experience, maybe not in California because it's wine country and you're ingrained in it. But in certain areas, what is it? Is it a Chardonnay? Is it a Sauvignon Blanc? But it's funny, they'll drink red blends with no complaint. But I've really got into the last 2 years white blends from Paso.
I think it's coming. I mean, I think the market recognition is coming. If you talked the same way about red blends 10 years ago, they wouldn't have really been a category. So
True.
I think the work that kind of the pioneering work that red blends are doing in the marketplace, getting people away from that, like, if it's not a varietal, it must not be good mindset, is going to help the white blends also. But beyond that, the traditions where you see whites blended are fewer than the traditions where you see reds blended. So, I mean, people really think of Bordeaux-style blends where you got Cabernet Merlot, Cabernet Franc, or Rhone blends where you have Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre. But both of those regions are overwhelmingly red wine regions. So yes, there is a blended white Bordeaux. Yes, there is blended white Rhones, but that's like less than 10% of the acreage in both of those places. So just their impact in the American market is a lot less, and people's experience with them is less.
Right.
But being able to take that white Rhone tradition and bring it to a place like Paso, where, I mean, a big chunk of what we sell is sold to people who walk into our front door and taste it at our tasting room. We can put it into context and explain it. I think it helps break through those barriers that people might have, the idea that, oh, I don't know what's in here, therefore I'm too afraid to buy it. And it is worth noting that this area has turned out to be way better for whites than we thought it would be. When we started, I think it's because the nights are so cold. Everybody gets thrown. People think of Paso as a hot region because the days are hot,
right?
Particularly in the summer. I mean, you can be 100 degrees. But there's this huge swing in temperature between the daytime high and the nighttime low. I mean, it averages 45 degrees swing in the summer. So you can be 100 during the day and you're 55 at night, or you're 90 and you're 45. And those cold nights mean that the grapes start photosynthesizing a little later in the morning. There's fewer hours where they break down acids. And so you end up with this nice purity of fruit, but also really bright acids. And as we've gotten to know our place better, we've realized that on average, it's cooler here than it is in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, because even though the days are warmer, the nights are more colder than the days are warmer. And we pick the same grapes on average a week to 10 days later than they do at Beaucastel, at the same sugar levels, but with higher acids. So if you ask the grapevines whether it's cooler here or in Châteauneuf, they'll tell you it's cooler here. And so we didn't realize that at the beginning. We thought that it was hotter than it actually turned out to be, because you're not awake at 3 in the morning to see it being so chilly. You're awake at 3 in the afternoon.
Speak for yourself. I was up at 4 this morning.
Yeah, well.
I'm staying on East Coast time now. It is cold. So I was in Santa Barbara in Ballard Canyon.
Yeah.
And winery that I sell put me up for the night. Beautiful. I mean, just gorgeous. And problem is they didn't have any. Well, they had space heaters, but they didn't have any air conditioner heat. And it's, very Spanish influence.
Cold tile floors.
Yeah, it was cold. I mean, taking a shower this morning. Whew, I mean, I made sure that was hot in there, because then you get out, it's like, oh my gosh. But it's really interesting, the temperature fluctuation. You don't really think about it. I mean, listen, I live in Ohio. Temperature fluctuation is, it goes from 32 to 26 at night.
Yeah.
Or if it's minus 2, it's, or 2 degrees, it goes down to -2. It's amazing the temperature fluctuations in a lot of places in California, not just Paso.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I grew up on the East Coast, and like a big temperature swing is like 15 or 20 degrees. And here, every day it's 35, 40, 45. I mean, you get to November, there are days that hit 90 and frost at night. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's crazy.
Yep. All right, we're going to take a quick break with Jason. We'll be right back. All right, we're back with Jason Haas from Tablas Creek. We're going to try a little. Let's try the red.
Yeah, for sure.
How would you say your wines, while you're pouring that, compare to the Beaucastel, like the Coudelet and all those? How would you compare them to?
So the wine that I just poured is our Esprit de Tablas, which is the wine that we model consciously after the Beaucastel Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So that's a question of the blend that we're choosing, the flavor profile of the lots that we're choosing. So this is 40% Mourvèdre, 27 Syrah, 23 Grenache, and 10 Counoise. So the profile is a little different in terms of the varietals that we choose. It's a little less Grenache dominant. We've chosen to base this on Mourvèdre because Mourvèdre is such a Beaucastel signature. We also do a Côte de Tablas blend. I see that.
I'm taking this with me. That's delicious.
We also do a Côte de Tablas blend that's based on Grenache that's more like the Beaucastel Coudelet, which is Grenache dominant.
Yep, they're everyday. Yep.
So we have the luxury of being able to make different blends that have different lead grapes and different kind of selection criteria around the blending table. But I feel like you're maybe asking a bigger picture question of overall, if you were to taste, say, this Esprit side by side with a Beaucastel Châteauneuf, what would the differences be? And the
price would be one. Let's be honest.
Well, they have a little longer track record than we do.
It doesn't matter. I know what you're saying.
But I think the similarities would stand out more than the differences. The differences that I get are that, in general, there's a little more brightness and a little more purity of fruit in California, and a little more of that lovely, earthy, loamy character in the Rhone. And I think because of how much sun we have here, and because of that big swing in temperature between day and night, you end up with the fruit characteristics getting emphasized when the wine is young. And it's not that there's not those same kind of earthy, minerally, loamy notes here, but that's just kind of masked by the purity of the fruit when the wine is young, and it comes out as the wine ages. They sort of age together as they get closer, as they get older. I feel like the wines get more and more similar.
Mm-hmm. That's very pleasant. I like that.
And this is our pick of roughly the top 15% of what we harvest each year. So it's our pick of the best of the best.
So how do you kind of know what the best of the best is?
We do this around a blending table, taste it blind, and give it grades.
Okay.
So I don't want to know, for example, that this Mourvedre lot came from the top of the hill where the vines always are under a lot of stress and the yields are super low and we love it every year. I don't want to know that it's from the last pick of this cold pocket that we were worried was never going to get ripe and took forever to ferment. I don't want to know any of that. I just want to know that it's Mourvedre. And we might have 15 Mourvedre lots by the time we get to the blending table. And we'll taste them in flights of 3 or 4. And blind. None of us around the table know which lot comes from which block. It's marked on the bottom of the bottles by the most junior assistant winemaker as he's pulling samples. And that way we evaluate it just on its merits. We're not biased by what we think we know. And everybody grades them. Then we go around the table and kind of discuss what the characteristics are of each of those lots and decide, okay, this one is super pure Mourvedre character. It seems like we should aim it at the varietal Mourvedre. This one is rich and dense and tannic. Great, it'll go into the Esprit blend where we can open it up with Grenache. So we have these kind of discussions of character as well as quality. But it's done communally. There's usually 6 of us around the table, me and one of the Perrins and our winemaking team. And it's done blind because it's the only way that we can have confidence that we are really judging the lots that we have on their merits.
No one's ever tried to do something funny to you guys while you're all tasting blind.
Oh man, it's hard enough as it is. I mean, throw in a Pinot Noir that.
Yeah, is there any Cabernet around here?
Here,
do you do Cabernet or no?
We have about 2 rows of Cabernet that we planted as a part of our grapevine nursery, thinking that we would sell Cabernet cuttings to people.
Right.
The Cabernet is delicious. This is a great region for Cabernet, but it's just not who we are.
Yep, let's understand. That's fine. That's good that you're kind of sticking to your guns. You were going back about Paso and not maybe not being a Rhone region before and stuff like that. All I remember is Paso 20 years ago was Zinfandel.
Yeah,
and it was high alcohol, high heat. It felt like 17%, and it would burn you. I've yet to find anything from Paso in the last 10 to 15 years that is anything close to that.
Yeah, I mean, Zinfandel was the region's heritage, and there's still some people doing really beautiful Zinfandels. But Zinfandel's actually kind of a tough grape in this area because Zinfandel clusters ripen unevenly. So you can have green berries at the same time as ripe berries at the same time as raisins.
Really?
Yeah, Zin's hard. So you either have to have really sophisticated sorting techniques to pick it kind of in the middle and have something either an optical electronic mechanical sorter or a team of people who are sorting berry by berry that's going to pull out the green berries and pull out the raisins. The raisins are going to produce all the alcohol. And if you don't have that, you've got to wait until the green berries get ripe. And so you end up with the least ripe grapes on the cluster at normal ripeness, and then overripe, and then raisins, which is why you get the 17% alcohol in these kind of rustic, pre-modern winemaking in Paso. Obviously, techniques have gotten better. Winemaking has gotten better, which is why even in the Zins from Paso, you don't see that same kind of character anymore.
Interesting. How do you come up with some of the names for these wines?
So most of them we came up. It was a discussion between me and my dad. Usually it would be me walking into his office and saying I have an idea, and him shooting it down, and then him walking into my office and saying I have an idea, and me shooting it down.
Wow.
And eventually we get to an idea that neither one of us can shoot down, and we're at our solution.
Right. At least you know how it works. Right. I mean, that's the best thing.
Honestly, when I moved out here, I had a couple of the people who preceded me here who said, it's going to be really nice to have somebody who can say no to your dad. And I feel like in a family business, that's something which is important. You have to have that balance between, yes, we can do this, and no, we shouldn't do this.
And there's reasons why, right? I mean, you're not trying to be the disrespectful son. You see certain things that your dad doesn't see, and vice versa. I mean, that's just parenting and business too, especially when you're a family, but then you're also a family business. You can't just always be a yes man.
No, you can't. And one of the things that my dad was always so good at is he generated more ideas per day in the office than anybody I've ever worked with.
Really?
And what a great foundation for an entrepreneur. And he'd started business after business in the wine world over his 6-decade career. But at the same time, if you execute every idea, you end up driving yourself and the people who represent you out in the marketplace crazy because you change what you're doing so often. And when you only get one vintage a year, like you make a change, it takes a decade for that to really stick in the market. And so there was one stage before I moved out where we changed the name of our wine 4 years in a row. And that was because, like, for my dad, like, a year had passed since he'd made that last decision, and he'd had all this time to think of why that was the wrong decision, and he had a better one now. But the net result was in the marketplace, people were like, make up your mind. Like, figure out who you are and what you want to be.
Right.
So having that balance between somebody who generated all of these ideas and I mean, having somebody out here who could say, Dad, we just can't do that. It's a great idea, but we cannot do that.
Did you say that to him as a child? Were you the defiant child?
No, I was the rule follower.
Really?
Yeah.
Youngest?
Well, no, I felt like the oldest. My dad was married twice, so I have an older half-brother and half-sister, and then a younger full sister. So, but my half-brother and half-sister are 20 and 22 years older than I am. Okay. So they weren't around the house. I felt like an older sibling, even though I was third of four for my dad.
Right.
But at the same time, like, it wasn't like he was this distant, like, ruler from on high who said things and banged his fist on the table and we all did it. I mean, this
sounds like my father.
I mean, that is a model for fatherhood. Yeah. But that wasn't the way that he worked.
No disrespect to my father, obviously, but he was what he said goes, man. He was the law.
Yeah.
But it's all good. You know?
I feel like that was maybe a little more the way my dad was when he was younger in his first marriage. I feel like
he chilled out a bit and maybe learned from his mistakes. And no disrespect to him, but I mean, we all do, right? I mean, do you have kids?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah,
so the first child you kind of mess up and you hopefully get it right the second. I've got 3. My daughter's actually pretty awesome. She is awesome. She's my oldest, but you know, it's like anything. It's the 4-year change of changing things. It's like you're just, sometimes you're just driving one day and you just like, aha, you have that aha moment. Probably not good to have 4 aha moments.
Right.
One after. What was the best business advice he's probably ever given you?
So his business philosophy, which he developed again over decades and multiple businesses, was make a decision, put the resources behind it to make sure that you've explored it fully, but then be willing to move on from that decision if it turns out it's not the right one. I think people sometimes get stuck with saying, this is the way that I see that it has to be, and continuing down a path that leads them into trouble. I'm thinking, for example, of when I moved out here in 2002, we had been making wine we had grapes in the ground for more than a decade. We'd been making wine for 5 years, but we hadn't opened a tasting room. We thought that we were going to sell everything through wholesale and that it was going to be Vineyard Brands, which is the import company that my dad founded. It was going to be their job to get Tablas Creek established out in the marketplace. And we realized that's not the right way to do it. We need to take a more active role in our own marketing. And so opened a tasting room, started a wine club, started doing events, started working with our distributors, started kind of rebuilt the whole sales and marketing model for Tablas Creek, because we realized that what we had been doing wasn't working, or at least it wasn't enough.
Right.
And same thing with like the wines that we made. Our original model was we were going to make one red wine and one white wine, like Beaucastel Rouge and Beaucastel Blanc. And we realized 3 or 4 years into it, you know, that doesn't give us the flexibility to make the best wine that we could make, nor does it give us the ability to showcase a particularly great varietal lot, nor does it give us different wines at different price points that'll help a restaurant pour a particular wine by the glass, or put another wine at a higher price into a more collector's range. And so we kind of reinvented the business model for Tablas Creek a couple of times. And that was only possible because my dad was willing to say, okay, we tried that. That didn't work. We're gonna go in a different direction.
Interesting. What's the worst advice he gave you? Or the one you just didn't listen to? It's got to be at least one.
Well, I remember and this is tied into the last one. There's nothing that jumps to mind as really bad advice.
Right.
But I do remember him talking about a sign, which, and I assume this actually was true, but that was apocryphally at least on the gates at Calera, the great Pinot Noir specialist up like an hour and a half north of us, where there was a sign on the gate saying, "Don't even think of coming here if you don't have an appointment." And his idea at the beginning was, we don't want to be in hospitality. Like, that's not our job. The great wineries are not hospitality centers. Like, we're going to make the wine, and our reputation is going to establish itself out in that broader marketplace. And it wasn't like he gave me that advice. That was again the way that he was thinking
Right.
of how Tubbs Creek was going to be founded. And as it became clear that was not the right way to go forward, that was not really the way to build a winery in California, like, he adjusted his thinking.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much.
You're
Thanks
welcome.
for joining me.
My
We're going to
pleasure.
have a little bit of bonus content for our Patreon page with Jason, so hope you enjoyed, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. And Jason, thanks for having me in this pretty awesome place.
I'm happy to get you out of Ohio to sunny Paso Robles in
Oh,
late
yeah.
February.
All you have to say is wine or golf, and I'm here. So thanks for listening, guys.